Hello and welcome to Hermetic Tantra. I am here today for my first podcast with Robert Gray, and we're going to talk about Pythagoras today. But first, Robert, can you introduce yourself and how you came to Pythagoras?
Yeah, I love say a little about me. I've studied science, especially cognitive science and organizational science. I've studied like teams and training quite a bit. I would do these space simulators where I would take four undergrads and train them how to play this like Star Trek kind of bridge simulator, and then get them to be more resourceful through these error management principles. And I had little posters in the walls, and we would say little kind of catchphrases and be like, there's nothing that can't stop you if you look for an answer. And so I did a bunch of research, and that was really fun. I love philosophy and art, and spend a lot more of my time with people like that now. I'm in Florida. I got a little NASA sweatshirt. I was really excited about the Artemis 2 launch last, I guess, 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I'm a happy person, I would say.
Nice. So, how did you come to know and understand Pythagoras?
Yeah. So um I love Plato because Socrates is into virtue, and all the dialogues are not just about like debate, but they're about like educing a shared understanding of virtue. And I absolutely love kind of the ladder of love in the Phaedrus and Diotima's presence in the Apology. And I also just kind of love mystics. I participated in Pierre Hadot's Noetic Society while he was alive, and um, just love people like that. I think so. Pythagoras is perfect because he would have a mathematical insight and then like sacrifice to the gods. Like, how interesting is that? That he goes, "Oh, a new idea. Thank Zeus," or whatever. Like, I wish scientists did that now. So, like, he reminds me kind of Gurdjieff, that he would kind of go everywhere and keep trying to learn. And, at that time it was dangerous to travel. Like, we have roads and planes and stuff now. So if you have some resources, you can go all over the place and, encounter mysticism and shamanism and stuff. But at his time, he had to like persuade, kings not to kill him and things like that. So I love his whole vibe. And yeah, as a Platonist, I think it's just rich with the same ideas. And yeah, even Pierre Hadot has some work studying kind of early philosophers such as him. And I love that he like loved women and wasn't just like some masochistic, chauvinist. Like, he's kind of a proto libertarian almost, if that's not too far of a stretch. Um, yeah, so I love just I don't know if there's anything I've ever heard about him that I don't like, really.
Mm.
Um,
Well, and of course, we only know of Pythagoras through other people, really. Um, so there is a bit of questioning as to, who the real Pythagoras was. But uh, I come to this today in working. We've talked before about this in working with Hermeticism and researching that and how that developed. It came to mind that a lot of what is described in the Hermetic text, the Corpus Hermeticum, uh, really sounds a lot like a Pythagorean school. And of course, at that point, it was Neo-Pythagoreanism, whatever that means, which really, the Pythagorean schools that developed, for anyone that doesn't know, Pythagoras 570 to 495 BC, these schools get mostly destroyed around 400. And so then, like with Plato, you have people coming afterwards, and Platonism develops everyone's interpretation of Plato. And you have, I'm sure, the same thing with Pythagoreanism. He's died. 100 years later, is the school necessarily what he taught? This is unclear. But at the time of Hermeticism, which develops between in the time of Hellenism, from 300 BC to the takeover of Rome, you see Hermes coming up. Uh, we now have that as the technical Hermetica. It's a lot of Egyptian practices around the temples, astrology, magic, oracles, divination, protection, theurgy, animating idols is all that we have of the technical Hermetica. But then in the first century, we start seeing Neo-Pythagoreanism come up. And then by the time of Iamblichus in the uh, uh, third and fourth century, uh, there are even more Pythagorean people speaking about what he was working with. The harmonics and music, but also the mysticism. You have silent practice. You have, and to pull this back to the Corpus Hermeticum, you have a set of teachings that is divided between some lectures to students who are listening, the acousmatica, right? You have the listeners in the Pythagorean schools, or the acousmatica, I believe that's right, and then you have the mathematicoi, the students in dialogue. And in the Corpus Hermeticum, you have this same thing. You have dialogues within a small cohort around a master who's received teachings of mystical nature in a mystical setting, talking to mind, talking to God as mind, as the one. And so in working on this project, eventually you start, running into the same character, oh, Pythagoras, again and again. Eventually, I was like, maybe we have something coming full circle where Pythagoras is said to have traveled the world, as you said, and learned everything that he learned from the Egyptians, that this Egyptian teaching that we think of now as Hermeticism has has been passed to the Greeks earlier. The school develops, way of practice develops, the one, silence, vegetarianism, the reincarnation, all of these weird things that we receive as Pythagorean wisdom is Egyptian wisdom that then at the end of Hellenism as the Roman world comes up, is coming back again, uh, in the form of these small dialogical school of initiates practicing silent meditation to uh, reach uh, theurgical at one-ment with the divine nous, divine mind. Um, so that's how this the idea for this conversation came up, and just want if you could with that preamble, let's riff on that and what you can see and bring to a discussion about Pythagoras, the importance of him and this.
Yeah, I think it's so funny that like in the modern world, there's really kind of utilitarians and scientists, and the idea of like spending 5 years in silence seems kind of absurd to both of them. It seems like not even plausible at all. Um, but like, if you want to learn something, the first thing from someone that knows something, if everyone's figuring it out together, that's maybe different. But if someone knows something and you want to learn, this idea of silence as like a sacred vow that you're bringing when you're coming in is super cool to me. And also like the Greeks um did ritual where you'd like petition a year in advance and do all this fasting and other practices and then like go to an island and experience like pretty wild stuff again compared to like a kind of scientific, rational, utilitarian world that we kind of take for granted as normal today. And so they were um, super interesting and symbolism too. Like they like people don't get symbols at all. You do. I get that you do. But like a lot of times they think they're just like you know, text or something like that. Whereas like um a circle was sacred to these people. Like it had, it represented anthropos as being a mixture of irrational and rational, and they considered rationality like awesome. It wasn't like, oh, boring, pros and cons. So I love just all of that they're doing, and the kind of commitment that you'd be willing to go through to see what's at the other end of that, to really go, oh, cool, now I'm a Pythagorean or a Neo-Pythagorean. And the Greeks were I think triple like in a really unique place because they had rationality, which you don't really get the same way with the monotheisms, but they also, like you said, they have Egypt, they have ceremonial magic, so they're free of the monotheisms, but they have rationality and sacred magic or something like that. And again, I think Iamblichus does this so beautifully. He pushes back against the hyper rationality of Porphyry and some people like that by saying, no, 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 the soul is descended. We need to live the gods through us or meet them and honor them, but here, not in some other, place. So just the ways of life and ideas that are kind of embodied by these people is to me supremely beautiful. Yeah, like there's a numinousness to them that you just can't get from taking a biology class in high school or studying algebra in college or something like that. They were using numbers symbolically. And so that when they said even and odd, they weren't just categorizing sets of things. They had all sorts of meaning and concordances and stuff. So
Well, and we in thinking about these people, 5 years of silence, you're in a communal setting, which is something that comes up in Egypt again. at the turn of the millennium, you have all these schools that are in communal settings and such, and the origin of monasteriums is an enclosed room in your house that you go to do practice. But you go and you think of Pythagoras and these mystics uh nowadays, and we kind of go back to now what we think of as a monastery. And the Catholic priest, you're going off, you're leaving the world, you're renouncing, and this whole renunciation. And yet we hear of these Pythagoreans that once they do their practice and they come back and they're the philosopher kings, which we see in the Republic. And I think this is a something crucial in reading Hermeticism. And it'll be interesting to see what comes out of. I don't know if you're familiar with author Christian Wildberg. He's a philosopher, and he mostly works on Egyptian texts and research, but he's doing uh, a new translation of the Corpus Hermeticum, where they're looking as a philologist what what are the different voices in the text. Can we see where a copyist has included marginal notes, or others stepping in and inserting language or stories into the Corpus Hermeticum that didn't fit? And you see that if you read Corpus Hermeticum, there's various texts where it'll start off in one register and then it becomes very Gnostic. But if you if you take that possibility that there are really two texts here, reactions that are inserted and an original text, and you separate that out, you can clearly see a Hermeticism that is world positive. And they they speak of, but the language is difficult because they're talking about hating the body to love the mind and clearing away the senses. But if you take a moment and don't be too judgmental about that language, this is very much Buddhist practice, but without the language of hating the body. Of course, this does come up in Buddhism and Tantra and whatever. You have people that end up with this view. But again, come back to Pythagoras. We see this 5 year silence and a vegetarianism and all this. But these are practices that you do, like fasting or going into isolation, going into retreat. You don't do it because the goal is to leave the world and to stay in this damn hut out in the desert. Like, really, that's your goal. Your goal is to end up in a hut eating locusts out in the desert. That's your goal. That's where God is, and not, this world of beauty and everything that we get from the scientific side of Pythagoras is about beauty. The one God is the one and the beautiful, and harmonics and geometry and mathematics is all about understanding a world that is one with God. It's the one. The one is the all, and that is God. And so the all, if God is the all, God is good, God is beautiful, then the all is good, partakes of the good and the beautiful. And you see that in the first Corpus Hermeticum text, the Palmandres, you see this come up that nature is co-emergent with mind, which again back to Buddhism, we clearly have some it's not clear how much this is really like solid, like Buddhists talking to Greek philosophers, but the Greeks were there. We have Bactrian Greek Buddhists, and we have references of the gymnosophists coming to Greece. We have Pyro, and we know people were in Egypt from the Buddhist kingdoms, uh, and for them, in a tantric, and this comes about later, but in Tantra, you have Shiva and Shakti are awareness and appearance, which to me is mind and nature of the one Brahman. And so it's interesting how much from our modern view, I think we've distorted what mystical practice is, that it's a practice to get somewhere. And just to pass it on to you in a second, but uh, another bit that comes up for me in this is the Iliad and the Odyssey and Odysseus's journey that brings him back home, and his wedding bed is a living olive tree of Gnosis. So it's a journey back to where you've always been. I there's actually a great book about this. I came about I don't know how I came about connecting all this together back in the 90s, but I found a few years ago an author wrote about this 20 years ago. This journey back, you have to go through this process of tearing yourself down, going into isolation, alchemical transformations, all of that, going through trials, everything. But ultimately, I think the lesson is to return with that knowledge.
That's right in the Republic. The Socrates returns. Plato in his letters criticizes people that don't return. And if you've been given an initiation and you don't, especially once you're very good at it, share it, it's the most selfish act in some sense because someone spent their finite time showing you the infinite or whatever, and now you're not doing the favor back. It's the like Socrates returns to the cave as an icon or an image of the one. He's not just ascending. He goes into the Piraeus, the most filthy, self-indulgent, lost land. And he doesn't go, no, let me tell you everything. He goes, okay, I've got to wear this fake mask. I've got to talk to these people where they're at. I've got to use restraint. But he's trying to seduce them to the good. And that you don't have to do that. Once you find meditative bliss or whatever you want to call it, you there's nothing above that. The one is the one is the one is the one. And once you can maybe deepen your practice or whatever, but like once if you put anything above the one, you're kind of making a mistake. But yeah, the return is so important. And Iamblichus, I think, says that really well in Greg Shaw's books and other books. Like, um, you embody theurgy. You do it so that you can then enact it. And um that is itself like theosis in some way, is the return. And um yeah, the Odyssey is really interesting too. It's uh we have all these other traditions and their myths, but it is a myth all full of wisdom. There's these different types of traps that you can fall into. You can be a lotus eater today. You can be surrounded by cyclops today, sirens and harpies. All of these things are archetypal situations you might encounter as a naive person. But if you keep your heart set on your beloved and try to return to this olive tree, through your cleverness, kind of Odysseus is almost in some Platonic schools, um, between Socrates and maybe like Achilles. So he has nous, but he also is a little more worldly, in some ways than maybe like a sage like Socrates. But he's great. I mean, he embodies so much virtue. And um, yeah, what you said was really, I think, interesting too, that like India was sending emissaries west, and there's statues of Indian people in Greek and Roman cities that predate Bactria, for example, and they're very old. They're not a big part of the culture, and I never heard about them in college or high school or anything like that, but you can just read about these things, and there are famous. So the idea that Socrates meditated for 24 hours, he could have 100% learned that from an Indian or from some culture like that, because they found Greek artifacts in Norway that shouldn't have been there at certain times, that like when the British empiricists were writing their histories were like, oh, this shouldn't be here, but they are. So they had boats and lots of travel um, during these times. And especially, I think people like Pythagoras or even Socrates, like in the dialogues, goes to Egypt and he knows Black Athena and all that cool stuff. There's lots of cultural transmission and the Silk Road happening much before like 1000 AD or whatever. Um,
I would push that back to like around 4000 BC.
yeah,
The
sure.
cuneiform script came about for accounting. Well, what are they accounting? They're accounting trade goods that are getting passed, and you don't develop something like that at the beginning. You've already been doing it. And so then you're rationalizing what is maybe a mess. Like, oh, everyone's been arguing for hundreds of years about, the weight of such and such and its worth and how we're passing it back and forth. And so eventually you end up with a cuneiform script and accounting in in a center that has become rich from the trade. Well, that's already been going on. So if we're going to say that cuneiform and the cubit and accounting systems are 3500 BC, well, that's because of a trade network. And we know that there was lapis lazuli in Egypt by 3200 BC. So, there was a large trade network that was going up until it's kind of pegged to sort of like the collapse of the Dilmun civilization, which is like uh that's the what is that? We're all fighting over it now. The Bahrain. It's Bahrain.
Okay. Yeah.
And there was a Dilmun collapse around 1200 BC where they move, and that's of course the the Bronze Age collapse, and then we have the Iron Age, Dark Ages for Greece. We'll
Yeah.
come out of that. Egypt my God, it's like it had 3,000 years already by the time of Solon getting told off, like, yeah, you kids. Well, yeah, yeah. And just I found the article. It's called "The Journey Back to Where You Are: Homer's Odyssey as Spiritual Quest." This is by David A. Beardsley. I think he published it around 2015 or so. But highly recommended. I don't think there's many other people that really go into the Odyssey quite so deeply as he does in it being mystical, which is kind of controversial that you would even have this in the Odyssey or in the mythology.
Yeah, I mean it's um I like John Vervaeke talks about proto shamans would be kind of trainers for groups, and they would like use these images to attune big groups to be like a massive unit of one hunting, or to we have this ability to imagine and gestalt and orient as okay, we're going to train the dogs and the people, and we're going to do all this complex coordinated kind of stuff. And the shamans were training people. They were taking you into caves and using all sorts of weird symbols and stuff, and letting people have a mind, a plan, and stuff like that. So I think, and it's like now you just like get some funding, go to college, learn a curriculum, but they would like not just teach everything to everyone. In fact, even like in the Greek times, if you were rich, you could afford tutors, but if you were poor, you were illiterate. So you were at the mercy of like the people with books and images and stuff like that because you couldn't contradict them because you couldn't read what they were like looking at and stuff. So having knowledge, whereas we take it for granted that you can, we're in a golden age of like you can just read everything that everyone's ever written whenever you feel like it, whenever you have the time. Like if you figured something out, it was like held back and very valuable and um that kind of stuff. So I think
Well, and
yeah,
I think that's key to the transition that went on of going from oral mythology and imagination, the imagery that you pass on through oral communication. You're developing a a view, and Iamblichus, of course, talks about the importance of imagination. You mentioned this before, and that's what one thing that I saw early on, being someone who does Tibetan tantric practice and deity yoga. You're training your mind through a developed iconography that has a a a view, an orientation, a symbolic structure that is logical and has a progression that you can follow to develop what is being passed from a master to the disciple. You follow this course of training of of forming a a new world view. It's not a new world, it's a new view of the world that you're training yourself to see. Um,
have you heard of the possible worlds theory in psychology? This guy Dasher Keltner.
no,
He's one of the best social psychologists I think alive. He trained under Paul Ekman. Do you know Ekman?
no.
So I don't want to get too off topic, but like um, he does some really cool work on awe, which is like philosophy begins in wonder, right? Like that's one of the most famous quotes. And he has this paper that I've been reading about how it's literally the title is How the Imagination Transcends and Recreates Reality. And so, our mind can frame things, but we can also reimagine it. Like other animals do that, but we do it. We're like, oh, I see a temple here or a shopping mall or whatever, a football stadium if you want, if you're really into sports. And that's pretty wild. If you look out at the world, it's all trees and water and stuff. The idea that you can picture a sophisticated structure, um, or another thing that consciousness does really well is it notices qualities and aspects of things. So it says, oh, lions and tigers are both alike in their fierceness. And so if you can hold a quality in your mind and return to it and practice silent meditation and concentration, you can probably tap into these kind of archetypal qualities and then enact them, like the way, a car will break down and a mother will just jump out and like lift it off of her child or whatever. It's like, what? How does this 130-pound woman become like so strong? But it's like it must be there's latent structures that get, basically the rational mind collapses and the desiring hyper, mind takes over and we do things that exceed our expectations. So I love the idea of being quiet and contemplating a virtue because like I was yesterday doing some meditation. Do you know metta, right? Like Buddhist metta. Yeah, I was doing like meta and I do kind of some play with it sometimes. So I'll pick a virtue and I'll try to like go, okay, well, what would it be like for me? What about my body and my mind and my, personality? And then I'll go to my friend Tim and I'll think about like I send this quality to his body and his mind and his soul. And then I'll go to a stranger at the gas station and the same, and then like and keep going further and further away from like your person. And I was doing mercy for whatever reason. And then when I was at this museum later that day, I saw a painting on mercy. So I was kind of attuned to it to begin with. And now I see an image of it that's in kind of a sacred place. And then I was like nicer afterwards. Like literally like within 5 minutes of that painting, I'm like, that's not just in my mind. I could be bringing this into the world. And I'm like holding doors for people and being courteous to strangers and stuff like that and slowing down and letting other people talk when I'm bumping into them instead of just being like, "Oh, look at me," blah 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 blah. And it's cool that if you're only rational and analytic, you can miss that qualitative part of life but if you start to attune to it, it can be everywhere or it can be an option for action and stuff like that. So I absolutely love deity yoga and contemplating it could be a being, it could be an animal, it could be abstract. Like the Pythagoreans are kind of abstract in the way they do some of this stuff. That's really interesting. But if you have a symbol, like a symbolon, like iamblichus, it has icons, unlike representations. They participate in the thing that they represent, and so you're getting a little taste of Jesus when you pray at the cross. It's not just like playing with Legos or if you have some deity that you go to her temple every day and you start to embody that being and um yeah, I mean that's why I think the one overflows. I love that language of the overflow so good, it flows down into us. It's like nice. What a great symbol to have. It's like not only is it like this quality, but it's so super abundant that it like births fuses or whatever. Um, so yeah, I think the imagination and this idea of possible worlds and how we can attune to them, especially through contemplation and embodied action, or through relationships with others, like whether it's a guru or friends and stuff like that. Um, and then it almost takes on a life of its own, which is just beautiful.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned Iamblichus. I was going to point to that as well, and that's the whole uh, everything behind magic and icon making. All of that is about the symbolon and the symptomata and the correspondences that go on. And sympathetic magic is about putting yourself in sympathy with this aspect of the divine reality. Reality is divine, nature is divine. And so taking on those attributes are a way of reflecting God or goddess back. And of course, with Pythagoreanism, you have musical therapy and the story about I don't recall the details, but some youth is carrying on and angry, and there's another youth who's Piper who's going along, and he's playing his flute to a certain scale and manner that is that Pythagoras sees is disruptive and has him change his tune. And we even, we have that saying, oh, you need to change your tune.
Well, think about that. Think about how much your vibe actually influences what happens to you. If you walk around angry or depressed or sad or the opposite, like cheerful and happy, people do respond to you differently. Even
Yeah.
if you change your clothes, which we take for granted. I remember the first time I wore kind of a dress clothes because I was teaching the LSAT for law students and I didn't want to be less dressed than these students. So I started wearing ties and nice shirts and stuff. And the first day I did that, people were like opening doors for me and stuff. And I'm like, what is happening here? But there's something about, like, imagining fake it till you make it and dressing like where you want to be, not where you are. And yeah, the synthemata and the symbolon and all that stuff is it can become Gnostic and irrational, but I think when balanced, it's so smart. It's just like we have this gestalting, attuning mind that if you fill it with the right images, especially over time, like it just learning theory supports all this stuff. If you do spaced repetition, and frequency, intensity, duration, like the workout principles, you start to have kind of a complex, but complex is like kind of a negative connotation in psychology. But I think of them as potentially like Daimon or guardian angels. They don't like you have this kind of uh agent that is within your psyche that gives you access to things that your egoic self doesn't actually have. It's like this cool thing. Even in I don't, you might like this. In dreams, people will go to sleep and encounter characters in dreams and they'll be bad at math and they'll ask the person in the dream do 2071 times 3072 and the dream person will say the right answer super quick and they'll wake them up in these studies and say what number did they say and they'll write it down. It'll be the right number. How could someone that self-identifies and has lived as someone bad at math just when they're asleep get really advanced math stuff happening to them if we don't
Uh,
have this potential kind of, Socratically pregnant in our souls?
right, right. Yeah, well, it comes, back to the view, and this is uh, key in Tantra of the return through Rigpa of, you have this non-dual experience and thinking that it's outside of you, right, is a major obstacle and sort of a meditation disease of getting lost and losing the not finding a way of returning that view back to where you are.
Yeah. No, I think integration is really interesting. How people can like have experiences that they kind of don't acknowledge consciously or can't kind of bring into their conscious self. It's a really interesting because in I don't know if you know, oh gosh, the Bain Marie uh Maria Prophetess, the alchemist. Do you know her?
I know the name. She was she was the teacher of Zosimus, right?
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Yeah. And so she had this expression, the one and the two and the three and the four. And so there's probably more than one way to take this, or there's maybe levels to it or something. But one of the ways that I've learned to take it is like, okay, there's the self, right? There's you, there's me, there's the self. And then it can encounter something novel or some like higher form or something, or like from your unconscious in a dream or whatever. So then that's the two. And then if you let the two encounter each other, because you can be so naive that you don't really consciously encounter the other. You know, right now we could both just be so solipsistic that we don't really appreciate each other. Like that's even possible when really deep things are happening. But you can encounter the two, and then that bursts the three, right? Because now there's a thing, a different thing, and then they're interacting, right? Iamblichus is great at the interaction stuff, the like hyphenated kind of like third thing that appears. And again, like that could be I love love, so it could be like you encounter someone so different from you, but that you just can't look away from, and that can create, a third thing. Now there's like a relationship. You both care more about it than you do about the people you were when you started, and then that births what it births as the four, which generally like returns to the one. So you don't want to just keep going up and up in numbers and get like too complicated. So then the one becomes the two, becomes the three, becomes the four, which is a one, and then it kind of you can
Is 10. Well, the tech talks that 1 plus
yeah
2 plus 3 plus 4 is 10.
yeah. There's all sorts of that in
Right.
this book. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
lots of that, and here's a little triangle
There you go.
diagram full of
Yeah,
that stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
but it's so simple because really like it can be you, the beach, the new feelings you have, and now you found a new joy. It doesn't have to be, it can be a super profound thing where you meet, Ganesh and then you two, create a whole religion or something. But um, I love that because it's so true. If you just stay solipsistic or relativistic or whatever you are, then you lose the ability to encounter an other as other. But if you're kind of aware of that, you can let it happen all the time. And then if you then really encounter the other consciously, some third thing will happen and then you grow. And human growth is self-transcendent. It's like how we do things that surprise even us.
I'm not sure how this came up in me, but when I first started working on Hermetic Tantra, of thinking about that, really right at the beginning of that, I I don't know if a realization or just putting two and two together. I'm not I'm not sure, but uh, very early on, it became clear to me that the origin of the universe is love, and that comes about through the one desiring to know itself and birthing wisdom as these two, appearance and awareness. We think they're very different, but they are required, and that difference is required in order to experience love and gnosis. Love and gnosis, if you love someone, you want to know them. And when you know someone, you can find love for them. And it's a handshake. It's this handshake that creates the universe for me. And create, what I don't know.
It's a great word.
That's how
Yeah.
I relate to difference and these metaphysical systems and ideas and practices. Uh, uh, and I think a key view in what comes out in Hermeticism is this.
Love is so transformative. I mean, like love, people in my early life loved me so much that gave me more than anything I've ever had. Like just even as a resource, as like a like you can return to when people loved you when you're in times of need and stuff. And love is so unselfish in ways that like other things are not. So yeah, I think I
Well,
love love. Yeah.
and what's the point otherwise? Really, like what's the point? And ideas of, well, you need to know God is to be obliterated and go into the light and oneness. Well, oneness. So none of this. So no experience, no other. So there can be no. So what are you even experience? Like, well, that's the point. Well, what you like? You don't like experience. You don't like the experience of finding another that you can love or to share or to help, to open the door. That all comes about through other. And so it's kind of a trick in these practices of how not to get caught up in the one as an other,
I see
separate
what you're saying.
separate from you, and this dualist idea that we need to leave this behind to embrace the one. No, we need to leave the view behind that we are separate.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and that's what Greg said to me personally. And I have a copy of his Theurgy in the Soul book that he signed for me at that thing I was telling you about before we started recording. He was there as well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love your stuff. Please sign my book and all this stuff. And he was saying he was like doing so much. I'm paraphrasing, maybe butchering it a little bit, but the gist of it, like he was, you can go to the ascent and be so in unity. But then he realized there's like he's missing something, and he's missing like love and other people, not imaginal love, physical love, emotional love. Like, and you can't, it's narcissistic or solipsistic to not connect with other people. And that's Neoplatonism has the world soul. I don't know if there's a kind of a corollary concept in Pythagoreanism, but the world soul and the world body are everything participates in them. And Marcus Aurelius has some really nice passages in the meditation that says, look, like the foot needs to be the foot, and the hand, and the brain, and the heart, and they all together make the body. And you don't want just all hands or all hearts. And it's in alchemy, the philosopher's stone is a complex unity. So it's got the unity, but the difference is it's an integrated complex unity that's kind of autopoetically evolving. So yeah, and you're missing so much of nature and the possibility of life when you're not letting the other be other. There's a way to be too other where it becomes almost like uh ironic in the worst way, but it's so fun to look at the world from a bunch of perspectives compared to just my perspective. I mean, even just today, I've been just joyfully delighted in getting to know you. And same thing in the forum. Like we couldn't be more different in some ways, but it's your difference that is so charming. It's like we have things in common, but it's like Tim for Tim's sake that is interesting. And then I think to make new symbols or new relationships, you have to show up too. You can't be so introverted that you're not giving the group or the other something to encounter. I think it's really easy too. I get in such apophatic, kind of quiet states that I have to remind myself, like, hey, speak, just say whatever the first thought is, because now you're participating from your soul, not just like in this state or whatever. And it's so beautiful sometimes when you just share yourself in front of some person you've never met, or vice versa. Appreciate the other as being so vibrantly themselves that they're different from what you'd expect or what you know.
Mm. Uh, um, so to come back to Pythagoras
Yeah, please.
in all this that we've spoken of, uh, a real person kind of gets the real person of Pythagoras perhaps gets lost, but also the foundational nature of Pythagoras in what we've now been given this idea of Western civilization, right? And our rationalism and seeing these mystics as superfluous, I guess, uh, fanciful. Like, sadly, a lot of, what we might think of as Western esotericism and mysticism has been, overwhelmed by Harry Potter
Yeah, sure.
and stupid kids running around with wands pretending, to manifest dragons and completely failing to see uh, an experiential process um, that is, we've talked about the journey to the one and the return. How do we return Pythagoras?
Hmm. What do you think the answer is to that if you had to speculate?
Oh, wow. Well, I just asked the question. So I don't have the answer on the tip of my tongue.
That's honest. I appreciate people that say they don't know when they don't know. So that's very
Yeah, I
fair.
don't know. So I guess that's why I wanted to have this conversation, was maybe to find that. And that points to what I was saying about the Iliad and the Odyssey. Um and making that connection. Well, let me let me take it this way. Um, when I first got into Buddhism, and I've told you a bit of this story before, and was also the same time that I started an art project that I was working on, or that I've been working on since 1996, 97, and I got into Buddhism in 98. And it was a a key sentence that I came away with in my understanding um, of the Iliad and the Odyssey was somewhere between the heart and the mind, something went wrong. And in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you have a man in a society that are guided by their thoughts and their passions and towards this war between civilizations. And Odysseus leaves behind a family, a kingdom, beauty, a son to chase after this other, and loses himself, loses everything, all the booty that he got, his crew, everything, loses it all, and makes his journey through the underworld, right? This mystical journey. We see this story over and over again. And his return is the return, well, like I said, in that title, Journey to Where You Are. And that is the beauty of his family, of everything that he's created, of everything that he shares. Um, and I think we, at least in what we call Western civilization, has done much the same in that our journey is through technology and rational thinking, controlling our passions and our thoughts. But in doing so, into trying to control the Iliad of our nature, of our warring nature, which we obviously, we're totally failing at. We've failed to really encounter the heart.
I love that about Plato for all the criticism in the forums that we both participate in, or the people call Plato an idealist, of this, of that. Like Socrates in the Alcibiades loves Alcibiades' soul. Diotima corrects Socrates. Socrates thinks that love is only good, and she says, no, 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 love is what is the midpoint between virtue and vice, between good and bad. And so you can love the wrong thing. And, if you're lucky, maybe someone points you towards a better thing. But you can, your passions, you can love technology and love, you know, capital gains or something like that. I don't even know. But you can also love where you are. You can love just being in a peaceful place. You can love the feeling of nature. And to me, like a moment when I just was like for months kind of dumbstruck, and wonderstruck is probably a better word, but just that nature, at least in a lot of ways, is just providing without asking for anything in return. it blows my mind. I didn't do art for like 6 months because I'm like, I can't outdo this. Why would I make something when the thing making me is doing it effortlessly and better than any craft I have? And it's like, so like learning to love well is a quest, and you can be thrown aside like Odysseus is and his crew. They start the Odyssey with like, cursed are us for eating the exalted bovine of the sun god on foreign lands. So they just pick up these practices mindlessly and it ruins them. And he's just always trying to like relove his mind, relove his wife and his son. It's kind of poetic. He like sheds a tear when his dog notices him when he returns home. It's not power or cunning, it's the connection that
Mm.
is so moving to this person as he's heartbroken that he can't have these things. And um we're so far from, not to get preachy or whatever, but we're so far from that sometimes because like I tell my friends, I love you. It's great. And or wow, look at what's here in front of us. And they're thinking about things or focused in the future or these big projects, which is all great. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm glad we, have our parents and grandparents live twice as long and we're not malnourished, even though we're just eating garbage and choosing to be malnourished or whatever. It's Yeah, no, love is so transformative. What you move away from and what you move towards or who you move towards. Um, I have a friend, I won't get too into this person, but like I have such joy just in the little communications with this person. And um, I'd rather spend another week with my grandmother or my grandfather, who are both passed away, than have $1 million. Like, I'd trade money for love in a heart. Like, once you lose something, that's the greatest teacher is, oh, wow, what can I never have anymore?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I think Pythagoras is doing this stuff too, because there's a lot of ways to misconstrue it, but like the virtues and the training to me seem to be trying to like honor what's real, what's transcendent, attuning to beauty. I mean, he uses the word beauty over and over and over again, and what he's doing, like I can't even imagine. I don't think Elon Musk ever experiences beauty. I think when you're so covered in karmic soot, like our president is, et cetera, like that's what you lose when you do bad deeds, is you can't feel the transcendent goodness that's like everywhere, when you're so covered in filth. Yeah, and vice
Uh,
versa. Like when you
And
practice, you can do those things.
let me throw two more things in to the mix. Um, Pythagoras was supposed to be the first philosopher. Well, what does philosophy mean? The lover of wisdom. And another thing, a saying, I'm not sure exactly where this comes from, but I, I, it's maybe a Plato or Pythagoras or Socrates, the life well lived. And
Yeah,
Odysseus, his return, his wife challenges him because it's been 20 years, to make sure, you know, who it is. Well, okay, if you're Odysseus, go bring our wedding bed down. And, Odysseus, if it's really him, would know, well, I can't. It's a living olive tree. That, it was our wedding bed was crafted out of living wisdom. So,
yeah, I love it.
um,
I think it's great.
anything else that we can pull out of Pythagoras, and while you think about that, I'll throw another thing out uh, from Corpus Hermeticum again in the creation mythology. held there. It's nature is in an erotic embrace with anthropos. It's the soul, the world's soul is in an embrace with mind. Um, and I just I would find it hard to believe that if your view in a practice is starting with that, that surely you're gonna arrive back to where you are in this in the good, the beautiful. Um, any perhaps closing thoughts or any, what can you pull out of Pythagoras to finish our conversation or provoke further thinking as to Pythagoras, the good, the beautiful?
No, I love that. I think uh it's so tragic that um how do I say it? Like by just what you care about and how you care about it. And yeah, we didn't. Well, here's something I want to bring in. Like, they valued friendship in such a beautiful way. There's this myth where this, like, Roman or Greek or whatever, some city guy, arrests this Neo-Pythagorean and sentences them to death. And, like, the Pythagorean, not wanting to break the customs, accepts that in a kind of a little mini rational discourse. He goes, "Okay, great. Well, I'm into harmony. You've accused me." And he says, "Wait, but can I just go settle my affairs before I do this?" And the guy's like, "I don't trust this. This is garbage, you know?" But then the guy's like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna ask my friend. My friend will come here and just hold my place. You'll kill him if I don't return." And his friend, this is historically, I mean, who knows what really happened, but historically, this is supposed to be true. His friend comes, which is already amazing, and says, "Okay, you can hold on to me while this guy goes for 2 days or 2 weeks or whatever the agreement is." And then the guy returns and then does the punishment. And, like, think about how shallow people are. I mean, people swipe 40 dates in a year and just throw away other people like they're commodities. And they shop to this church and that church, and they have no allegiance to anything. And I remember I was at my best friend's wedding, which is, there's nothing more symbolon than a wedding in some sense. And I was at his wedding, and we met in grad school, which was like 2,000 miles from where he grew up, but I got to be near his kind of hometown, and his best friend was there from, like, childhood, kindergarten, or, like, even before that. And I just was so delighted because I'd never really heard of him. Like, he didn't talk a lot about him, but when I met him, they were so fond together that they had been friends. You can't buy that. You can't buy a 20 or 30-year relationship that's built intrinsically. And so I love that the Pythagoreans, not only were they, like, into virtue and knowledge and pushing science and religion and all these interesting things, but just friendship to me is, like, so profound. And you don't see Alexander the Great's friends doing anything great, or Aristotle's friends, right? He was, like, chased out of places. But these Pythagoreans, the Platonists, they always go, "No, no, no, I'm not a Neoplatonist, I'm a Platonist." They're always giving credit back to the tradition and to the founders and stuff. And that takes a kind of agape or a reverence or a respect that it's charming. I just don't know how else to say it. It's so lovely that they're putting people ahead of fame and wealth and even their lives, the isagoge. Do you know the isagoge? It's a text.
No.
Anyways, there's this or in Shelley's Prometheus. Do you know?
Hmm.
Yeah, like in the Prometheus story that the British romantic portrays, these lovers are like waiting to die together rather than being apart and selling each other out. This like, Persian or whatever, like outsider king captures these kind of Hellenic proto-Pythagoreans or whatever, and instead of selling each other out and throwing each other under the bus, which is this person asks, they're like, no, we'll die together. You can't rob us of our dignity. We would rather have dignity together than bow to you and your vile, conquest. And again, like this is something that not every tradition has, and especially they don't live it out. So I think almost better than almost any philosophy, the Pythagoreans value friendship. I don't know, did you find that as well when you like research them and stuff like that, that they're really loyal to each other and not for like blind loyalty, but because they kind of value the philia even together?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I love that. To me, it's so you know, you just by being with someone, you're pulled out of yourself. The same way great art or great music, it pulls you out of yourself. And friendship does that in an almost a more anthro loving way than
Mm,
music and art and stuff. So yeah, I think that's what I would end on.
nice. Well, my new friend, I have loved this first conversation, and I thank you.
Yeah, this was so fun, Tim. Yeah, we'll do this again offline or like this. Because again, like I like your vibe. I always like, I'll read your email. Sometimes you'll just say like some practices you're working on or some experience you had. And I have a pretty good practice and a vivid imagination, and it'll just shoot me to the moon, to the soul flight or whatever. And I go, oh, I'm so glad that's a part of reality. Sometimes I have amnesis and I forget that that's there, and then you'll just say this like awesome thing on the forum. So yeah, I also like your friendship and your personality and all that
Cheers.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, until we meet again, thank you.